What's going on YouTube? It is a beautiful Sunday evening. We have now been working on the G. This is officially, I think this is 2 full days now I'm into this one. We are doing headers today and valve cover gaskets. I've already got those in. We're going to be going over a couple of things here, how to get these in, a couple of tips. This is by far the hardest way to do it. You really are punishing yourself. Doing it on the ground like this, I knew this was going to take some time to do. I didn't want to tie up a hoist at work. It probably would have been faster because I would have had all of my air ratchets and all of my special wobbly sockets and extensions. That would have made it an absolute dream to do, but hasn't been too bad. Have had to fight it a little bit, but it is coming along really well. So these are the new headers going in. I've already got the driver's side in. This was a very cheap set off of eBay. This is the packaging that it came in. Some very low quality crap, I should say. I believe I only spent like $78 on them, so versus, a nice set of headers, which are, $500 to $700 for a nice shorty header. And they do come on deals every now and again, but I just couldn't pass up the price. And but whenever you pay that kind of money for the stuff, expect it to bite you. The driver's side bit pretty hard. I was able to get it in, and I'll show you that here really quick. But the problem that you have is that so far I haven't even attempted to hook up the bottom. I will let you guys know how that goes. But you end up having to waller out all of these holes because they were drilled in the wrong spots. And more than likely because it was meant for a different flange pattern, and I'm almost wondering if it wasn't for maybe like a 3.3 liter in a Xterra or in an older Xterra or an older Frontier, possibly. I don't know. They looked like they were decent. They did hold up to my banging and my smashing on the driver's side one, which I'll show you that. The biggest things you're going to fight. So the passenger side actually came out somewhat easier on this. Just so you know, this is the G35X. This is the all-wheel drive, so there is a drive shaft coming up and 2 front CV axles, which limit a lot of room from the bottom. So when you go to do headers, what you need to do is get your bolts off of the collector down here. So there are 2 studs that are mounted in the Y pipe underneath the car. But you're going to have to get those 2 off. And typically they are a 14 millimeter unless somebody's been in there and replaced one with a 12 or a 13 millimeter. That's also common. If they're bad rotted, sometimes it's better just to start with a 13 millimeter, even if you got to tap it onto the hammer. But you're just going to get an extension, preferably a deep 14 millimeter socket, a wobbly socket, and then a number of extensions to get you all the way back up into this area here. And if you look down in that hole, if I can get this camera situated at the right angle, there we go. So right down and back there, that's the Y pipe. So you're going to be bringing your extension not necessarily this far down, because I actually have the power steering pump pulled out right now, which is the better way to do it. So you want to start by pulling the cooling fan, and you're going to have to take off the upper radiator hose. If you're quick, you won't lose much coolant. Just pull it off and point the hose up. You are going to need to have a catch bucket underneath. Pull the radiator fan, and then unbolt and loosen your tensioner. No, completely unbolt it, but crack your tensioner loose and back that off. The locking nut in the middle right there is a 14 millimeter, and then it is a 12 millimeter on the bottom side, and you'll want a number of extensions to release that tensioner. That belt comes off fairly easy. You'll also need to take off the AC belt as well when you're on the driver's side doing the exhaust, because you're going to have to unbolt that compressor. You don't have to disconnect any of the AC lines, you just have to unbolt the compressor so that it will fall and move far enough out of the way to get to the very back manifold bolt, which is down in there, and he is a nightmare to get to. Right there he is. Got the camera on him, now I gotta get the light on him, and that's literally the biggest fight with this, is most of this you are doing it blind. Right there, see that nut? It's gone right there, that one. he is a fist fight to get to. But unbolt the AC compressor, tilt him out of the way. You're not going to hurt anything. And that will get you access to that nut. Leave the AC compressor off. When you're going into the manifolds, if you made the mistake of buying the same crappy ones that I bought, you are going to have to bang and bend the header in. And you're going to want to do it on the ground. Start with a big hammer, like a good 5-pound hammer. You can see where that paint is on the drive shaft. That, or on the steering column, is where I had to bang them in. A big hammer. And I'd say take it slow, but it's got to move quite a ways. You're going to have to take that steering column in and out about 4 or 5 times. So you can see right there's that nut on the column. As you can see where that white paint mark is on that black shaft, that's a steering column. Then it turns to rust colored. There's a bolt right there, 12 millimeter. You need to take him out. And then you need to get underneath the dashboard. And there is a 14 millimeter nut. You are going to want to take your seat belt and route it through the steering wheel and click it in so that nothing moves, because if that steering wheel free spins or you hook it up incorrectly when you go back together, it will snap the spiral cable. And you'll have to replace that. You'll have an airbag light. You won't have steering wheel controls. Absolute pain in the ass, expensive. They don't really take all that long to replace, but there is quite a bit that has to be removed. And you really don't want to have to deal with that. So make sure you mark the drive shaft or the steering column so you know where it's at. Back here, this is the steering column coming through. There are a bunch of 10 millimeter nuts that have to come off. I think I got all mine tightened back down. That bracket right there to the right, that needs to come off because it is actually sitting over top of the steering column boot. Now you're going to fight the steering column boot, and there's no way around it. Make your life easy and take that 10 millimeter bolt. That is a hose clamp. Take that loose. And then right there is your 14 millimeter nut. He's going to need to come loose. And you want to turn it preferably so that this is pointed downwards, this plastic part. On the back side of it, there's a clip that you're going to feel just behind it that you're going to have to lift up, and it's going to pull straight back towards you. Just mind your fingers, because if you get your finger caught up in that when it's coming loose, you can break it. So just be careful taking all this apart. Once that comes loose, you're then going to pull that drive shaft, or the steering column. I guess that would be the shaft part of it. You're going to have to pull that straight up, and then you're going to have to wiggle it. Take your time and be patient, and you're going to pull that entire piece, the entire grommet and bracket, as one piece. Now, you're better off to also remove this lower plastic column. This actually comes apart fairly easy. All there is one 10 millimeter bolt right there, and then this entire panel pulls forward and down. Just wiggle it. It will pop loose. You're going to have 1, 2, 3 connectors back there. Be delicate with the connectors. Don't break them. Also, over here, you'll see this vent. This is the sensor, which you can see, wow, mine's actually plugged full of all kinds of crap. I need to clean that out. This is the intake air sensor for your automatic climate control. So when you set a temperature, this is what's actually reading the temperature in the car. There's a little fan in here that's got a little temperature sensor in it that pulls air in so it knows how warm the car is. Be very delicate disconnecting either the plastic hose or the black electrical connector. And sometimes you just have to be very, very careful with which part, and sometimes you have to make a decision which one's not going to break, and it's going to be a lot easier to reconnect. So pull that whole drive shaft out. Then you can actually remove your factory header. And you're going to want to retain your factory header so that you have a template to waller out. That's the driver's side one that's already out. But then you're going to install or attempt to install. I would highly recommend that you pull the studs out. It will make your life a lot easier. Pull the studs out. If you made the mistake of buying the one I bought, you're going to want to waller it out well before it ever goes in. And right there at the bottom, where that very outward pipe contacts, you're going to want to start banging that in prematurely, because you're going to have to reinstall that steering column shaft to verify that you've got it bent in far enough, and you're going to have wanted to have moved a good amount of metal by the time you get to that point. And it is definitely the hardest part of this. You have to be very, very patient with it, banging it, wallering the bolts out, putting it back in. That literally took me a good 2 days to finally get that manifold bolted up. So as getting to a lot of these nuts on your manifold, I actually ended up reusing a lot of the ones, because out of my entire collection of exhaust manifold nuts and studs, I did not have the right ones. I did have a few of them. I would highly recommend, you can get these at your Nissan dealer. They will have these. Let's see, I might have a part number for them here somewhere. But they will make your life super easy. But these are what they are. They're a lot skinnier nut. Here, I can actually show you the difference. So these are the factory ones that are on there. And these are pretty wide, where these ones are a lot skinnier. And I wish I had a part number for you, but I don't. But anyways, those nuts will help out a lot with the install. Valve covers, these are quite the fight. You have to pull the entire intake manifold, plenum, upper and, well, I guess it's a two-part. You have the upper, and then you have the lower part of the upper plenum. Mine was actually packed full of all kinds of grit and carbon, and actually a good amount of sand. The intake, when I bought this one, actually did have quite the hole in it, which did have me pretty worried when I seen all that. So I took a good amount of time, some soap and water, and scrubbed it all out as best as I could. Got a lot of the carbon out of it as well. And all that is really soap and water took out a lot of it. It was actually worse. This is the upper plenum, which is turned upside down. But to get these lower plenums off, you have 6 bolts in the middle, about that long, you need to take out. And then there is 1 nut right here on the front, and 1 in the back right there. And I haven't got him back on yet. I haven't got this torque back down. But we do have the valve covers are already installed. These can be rather quite tricky. Your best bet to remove all this, to get the, once you have the lower manifold off, to get the harness out of your way, you want to remove that 10mm nut. There is another one. Where's he at? Right there. Which is a lot easier to get to once you have the lower plenum off. You'll pull out that 10mm. And then there is another 10mm nut or a bolt hiding right back here. He is a bugger to get to. Oh, he's right there. There he is. You're going to unbolt him. You're going to need to disconnect. That is the oxygen sensor. There is a little black tab, little tiny right there. You need to push that down and then pull this lever off. Obviously, you're going to need 2 hands to do this. Peel him back and wiggle with this. Be delicate with these connectors. These are very expensive, especially if you break this side. That is the oxygen sensor, which on this one, I believe the 2004 and up G35s, these are AFR sensors. So be delicate with those. They are expensive. They are not cheap. But overall, and then to pull the valve covers, there's 8 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 1 hiding right there, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 in the back corner. That one is a bugger to get to. You can't even see him right now. And then there is another end bolt right there underneath that bracket. You have to take out as well. When you get down to take the rest of the harness off before you can get the manifold off, though, there is 1 connector down here. Let's see with my eye, but not with the camera. There it is. That gray connector right there. Right there. Disconnect him, and then right there is the cam sensor. You can either disconnect it, which mine has the really bad fugly connectors on them, ones that are just, you know, an absolute nightmare to take off. It's a lot easier just to undo the 10mm bolt on the back of it, which is directly on the back of the head, facing towards the firewall. 10mm bolt, pull it out, pull out that sensor and replace that O-ring as well, and then take this entire harness and lay it all the way over here. Just be very careful with the cam sensor that you don't lay it on anything metal, because that can distort the magnets inside of it and it will not read correctly. So overall, if you're going to try to do this in your driveway, I would highly recommend having a second, third, I guess I can't see my old Ford out there, fourth or fifth vehicle, so that you have a way to get to work. Expect this to take some time. The biggest thing you're going to fight is patience. You're going to fight it. Expect maybe a couple of bloodied knuckles and maybe a couple of blisters. But when you go to take out the manifold on this side, if you wiggle and you're careful, it should drop right out. Once it is out, it will come right out the back. Your AFR sensor on the passenger side is right there, but he is actually going to be clipped in to that brass bracket right there on the back side over here. So you're going to have to disconnect it from that with a pair of needle nose pliers, push it through, and then same kind of connector over here. You got a little black tab down in there before the release arm will release, and then swing and wiggle, wiggle, wiggle it apart. Very delicate. It's definitely a lot easier to pull this coolant crossover tube, but I can tell you from experience that these Nissans, they are a pain in the butt unless you have a special vacuum bleed tool to try to get these to bleed out. And if you don't have that tool, it is just not going to work correctly. You're going to have air bubbles. You're going to have to drive it multiple times, let it cool down, refill it, and you got to be careful not to warp the heads on these engines, because they will warp. I opted not to do that. Very well could have, but I wanted to see if it could be done without removing that coolant crossover tube. That does not affect the driver's side, and I'm hoping that this manifold will not require too much banging and pressure. I'm going to try to get you a better angle of where the new manifold is coming up. But that new manifold will come up from the bottom is where you're going to drop it. Just make sure you've got the AFR sensor disconnected, and on both AFR sensors, before you go to pull them out, there is a little tab that actually is holding that AFR sensor in place, and you can't see where it's at, but if you move this harness around to get down to it, you can get it out and pop it out and then drop the whole assembly right out the bottom. So now what I get to do, because I was an idiot and decided to go ahead and install the other cheap manifold or cheap header, now I get to put these two manifolds together with bolts, mark that one, and then start wallering out all those holes, and then start the process of laying down on my back, fishing it up through the hole, pulling it up to here, sticking one hand down here, sticking another hand in here, and then trying to line up that manifold to put it on there, and then tightening it down. If you have not done a lot of exhaust manifolds, I would not recommend doing this yourself. This is quite the fist fight, and again, the biggest thing you're going to fight is patience. You've got to be calm. Start getting mad, walk away, work on something else for a minute. Make sure you disconnect the alternator right there. So make sure the battery is disconnected. Mine's already disconnected, but disconnect and remove that alternator. And then there is that alternator cable coming up, back up to this main junction block, which goes into the battery. Make sure that is disconnected. The heat shield is going to come straight through that hole. Just be very delicate, especially with this hose right here when you go to pull the heat shield out. And I'll show you that guy here in just a second, because he is mean and he slit me all the way to the bone. Let's see if I can show you. Right there, that was gushing blood for a couple of minutes. Just razor sharp. You've always got to be careful, especially with these heat shields, because even though it looks, oh yeah, that's nice and bulky, it's got razor sharp edges that will fillet you to the bone, and you won't even know you're cut until you've got blood dripping off your fingertips, and then you're going, ow, what in the hell? Those hurt pretty bad, but hopefully this helps you guys out a little bit. The upper intake part of the plenum, before I forget, actually comes out fairly simple. You have a number of mounting bolts going all the way around that hold it into place. A couple of them are different lengths, so make sure you remember where they're at. You have 2 coolant hoses coming up into the throttle body. You can bypass this, but this is basically to keep that from freezing in very, very cold weather, which is primarily when I drive this Infiniti because of the all-wheel drive. Make sure those get hooked back up. You're going to have all this unbolted and then very carefully lift up so you can get underneath with a pair of needle nose pliers to pinch the hoses, or pinch the hose clamps, pull them off, and then wiggle these hoses off. Be very, very careful, because as your arm comes into here, it can scratch you and cut you up. I think it was on my other arm. And of course it's all dirty, so you can't even tell. Good times. Anyways, went a little long with this one. Hopefully this helps some of you guys out. Hopefully, if you're smart, you'll either pay more for the headers and go in a lot easier, not have to fight half as bad, or maybe look at a different performance mod first, like a Y pipe, test pipes. Yeah, that would go in a lot easier than this crap. But anyways, have a good one, you guys. Any questions at all, please do not hesitate to ask. The big thing with this fuel pressure regulator, you'll notice that I have left it hooked up. Last thing, sorry, I know I've kind of continued to ramble on. There are 2 bolts that come down from the upper intake manifold that bolt onto that. Do not disconnect this unless you absolutely have to. It is not fun to get it back together. There's a special gasket in there. Even though it is stainless steel, it's typically only one-time use. And if you do disconnect it, make sure that you triple check that. Make sure it ain't leaking when you're done. Have a good one, you guys.